Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and my guest today is Warren. Welcome, Warren.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited that you are here as well. Warren has a couple of Cube projects that I'm excited to dive into. The first of which is the Melded Mardu Monarchy, which is a great mouthful to tackle all at once. Warren, would you give us the overview for the Melded Mardu Monarchy?
Yeah, it is certainly a mouthful. So this cube, like the name says, doesn't have any blue or green cards, with the partial exceptions of Burning Tree Emissary and Kenris Bellspear, but they were too much fun to leave out. And the idea is to create cinematic action and escalating tension towards an exciting finish that will generate as many stories as possible.
I love those descriptors. Like cinematic is one that I don't hear often, which I like a lot. And I think sometimes Escalate can get a bad rap in like commander spaces where it's like, it's just battle cruiser. But this is like a really exciting framework for it. Speak a little bit more about that because you talk about that some in your overview too.
Yeah. So the games can be decided early sometimes, but I want people to get to live their fantasies of putting together exciting synergies, big creatures, splashy effects, so that you can build up towards something that is more than the sum of its parts.
So Warren, why Mardu?
Well, I realized as I put together commander decks, picked archetypes in cubes, and think about my favorite cards over the years that this is my favorite color combination. I had a vintage cube that was initially accepted to the first CubeCon, and then the proxy rules meant that I needed to pull that out. But I played the bug cube and had a wonderful time, and thought that three color cube focused on the cards and colors and effects that are most personal to me was something that I could work towards for a future CubeCon. And so I started working on this cube at the airport on my way home from Madison 2 years ago.
It's striking how many projects started immediately on the heels of CubeCon.
Yeah, it was the event that launched 10,000 cubes.
So was this like disassembling your own commander decks or other projects to put into this one, or is this something you built from the ground up?
I built it from the ground up. The first cards that I put in were Rakdos's Return and the 7 mana Teysa from Dragon's Maze. I have fun altars for both of those, and I thought this was a place I could use them. I've since sadly cut that Teysa, but she still stays close to the box.
It's quite an ability on on that card.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard to lose once you get to it, but it was overpowering in Dragon's Maze Limited, and just couldn't quite hang with the rest of this cube compared to some of the other really powerful cards that are in there. So I didn't pull commander decks apart, but I took things that were fun from my own decks and from others that I had seen, or interactions from cubes or games that I've watched. Like I said, the goal is to try to generate as many stories as possible. And so I look for pieces that are story prone and put them together whenever I'm working on a project like this.
I really like that descriptor. What would be a marker you would look for to consider a card story prone?
Well, when in a game I've played in or watched, something exciting happened that, especially like if people discover a interaction that they hadn't considered before, or salvage a game that looked headed for certain defeat. On the other hand, snapping defeat from the jaws of victory, just memorability.
So in a color restricted environment like this, how do you build toward those interactions or those synergies rather than raw power?
Yeah. So when I put a card in, it's usually, like, except for those two that I mentioned, not by itself. So we look at, how do cards work well together? So one of my favorite cards that it's hard not to put in every cube where it could fit is Teralf, God of Fury.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And so, what things are fun with Teralf? By himself, he's pretty good, but if you have ways to multiply damage, like Sawhorn Nemesis, or if you have ways to deal damage to multiple creatures, but I mean, I won a game where the end result of damage to my opponent when I had Teralf on the board was in the tens of thousands, just by continuing to multiply damage as it ricocheted from creature to creature before finally going to their face. So
Excellent.
The synergies that I look for are like that. So cards that are interesting by themselves, and both of those cards are, Teralf and Sahur Nemesis. Crater's Claws is always good, but any two of those cards together make things a lot more exciting even than by themselves. So, Fury is going to be an all-star in any format where it's legal, but increasing the damage you do to each creature by one with Tai Wakeen means that you're also drawing a lot of cards on top of killing your opponent's whole board. And I just, I look for things like that, take notes, write them down, test them together so that, we're not just looking for what are the most powerful cards in a pile, but, little blocks of cards that work well together and overlap multiple other groups so that the cube is fun no matter how many times you've drafted it before.
Yeah, so when you're adding cards, are they added individually or do you add them as pockets like that or as little groups?
The update I just made for Duskmourn was individual cards, but they each fit into at least two or three pockets of cards like that. So, Screaming Nemesis is amazing if you're also already doing things with Boros Reckoner or Brash Taunter. And so, having more instances that are each slightly different of those effects is fun to promote. My favorite things to do in the cube. But when I was first putting the cube together, it was in blocks like that. Beyond the okay, well, I've got to have this card in here. What cards are good with it?
How do you balance aggressive strategies that are kind of endemic to these colors with some of these huge haymakers at the top end that cost 6, 7, or more mana?
Yeah, so that's been tricky because it's easy to go overboard with aggressive cards. But like so, we've got Lelia in this cube, but not Death Greeter's Champion, not the Bombardiers, not very many of the other three or less cost hasty red creatures like Robber of the Rich was in at one point, but it just made those strategies enough better that people couldn't get to their 7 drops. So there's a lot of removal and ways to disrupt strategies, whether you're gaining life or getting taking 2 for 1s. I don't think there's any way to deterministically arrive at that point. You've just got to refine and refine and refine until you get the right feeling where those 7 drops can be part of the same game as Ragavan.
And you mentioned part of that comes with testing. Are you able to test this cube pretty regularly?
Yeah, so I draft it with a full pod as often as possible, but I also have some testing partners where we'll put together a game, fix our hands and see how things work together. Like I wanted to put Giggling Skitterspike from Duskmorn Commander in here because it's great with Feather the Redeemed. It's great with Boros Reckoner type things. It's a good counter to cards like Glorybringer. But I wasn't able to get enough of those sorts of testing games in to feel certain that it wouldn't be over the line in the wrong direction.
A quick note there, that card also says indestructible on it, which is a pretty important word.
Yeah. So one of the things that I try to do in this cube and in any cube is to have counterplay for things like that. So, in addition to Shadow Spear, ways to reduce toughness to kill an indestructible creature, exile-based removal. I don't want, well, you played that and the game is over to be true for any card or set of cards. There's no infinite combos in this cube because, like I said in my video, I want the game to be contested until the very end, without someone just looking at a card they can't beat and waiting for several turns to die.
So I want to double back to something you said just a moment ago. Can you describe a little bit of that process of testing with like curated hands or pre-built decks? That's something I've not seen a lot of people do, but it sounds like it'd be incredibly useful when you're considering adding specific cards or packages like you described. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, so I do a lot of that when it's online with something like a virtual tabletop. Like let's say we're going to test Giggling Skitterspike. Okay, you mulligan until you get that card in your hand, and I'll have built a deck with all the cards that I think are interesting with it, and then we can play out those interactions in a few games that might take dozens or hundreds that I don't have time for if we're just doing a full draft and then seeing what comes together naturally. We can just shortcut to testing the interactions that we want to see.
Yeah, that definitely seems more efficient than just waiting for it to come up in one of the drafts along the way.
Well, I heard I think Mark Rosewater talking about testing scenarios this way, and it seemed like an obvious way to save time.
That's great. Some designers avoid the monarch mechanic for power concerns or for other reasons. What drew you to crafting an environment that celebrates that mechanic?
Well, I heard a lot of people say that, over the course of years, things like Palace Jailer in previous iterations of the Vintage Cube it seemed like they would just end the game on their own. And I wanted to challenge myself to make an environment where the Monarch mechanic would be fun, but contestable with multiple cards that didn't depend on combat damage, where you'd just be out of the game if you didn't have a way to get past Palace Jailer, for example. So almost all of the cards that have to do with the Monarch that are in these colors are in the cube, including all 6 of the courts and 4 Theurlingus. Uh, and I feel like I proved myself right that you could make this work with enough of a volume of cards and with the right cards and the right supporting environment. So Palace Jailer is still good, but it's not the end of the game by any means.
Yeah, I want to draw attention to that because I think that's a really neat solution. So rather than saying this mechanic may be too powerful, let's take it out, it sounds like you went the other way, which is to say this mechanic needs other things to make it a viable option and filled up the cube that way.
Yeah, to make it interesting instead of narrowing.
That's really good. As a fan of Palace Jailer in many other formats too, I'm thrilled to see that you were able to to set up a place where it can live happily.
Yeah, it's a fun part of the cube, but it is by no means dominant. So I mean, even fourth year Lingus, I would liken to in this cube is sort of the Black Lotus of this environment. It's very exciting. Everyone wants it. You stand a good chance of winning the game, but you don't necessarily see it every game. And even when you cast it, you're not guaranteed to win. This is not an environment of surprise wins from a safe point. You really have to build your deck to make that work.
And does that lean into the story moments you're aiming for also?
Yeah, I mean, everyone remembers the time that they cast fourth year Lingus, X equals 7 into settle the wreckage before they lost on their opponent's next turn.
Excellent. I'm thrilled to hear there's a home for Settle the Wreckage here too, another one of my favorites. I've seen this come up in other projects, but in an environment with like big creature centric haymakers, how do you keep the all removal deck from being the most efficient?
Yeah, so I wanted to challenge players to have, if they want to have efficient removal against creatures where they're trading up on mana, that's almost impossible in a single color. And some of the first cards I put in, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, I cut them. They're not in there anymore. If you want removal for a single white mana, it's more like Harm's Way, where you can take care of Ragavan, but you cannot take care of Gisela.
That's a cool restriction too, where it pushes you into a particular play pattern and you don't just get the monocolored answers.
There are exceptions and dynamics that I've played with, but so Terminate is very good, but that's not something you're always going to have up on turn 1.
You've mentioned story, and that's one of the things I think is most striking here as I consider this list. Do you have any standout memories of this cube as you think about some of the things you've experienced with it over time?
I mean, every time anyone has melded Brizella, that is a story. My friend Tyler, who I've worked on this cube a lot with, managed to meld Brizella, but then got obliterated by Skull smashing with X equals 6 before he could attack with it.
Oh no.
And oh, here's a good one. So we have Gadrak the Crown Scourge, and he's not allowed to attack unless you control 4 or more artifacts. And the great Joe Anderson had Gadrak in his deck, and he used Liquid Metal Torque to turn Chandra into an artifact, giving him the critical 4th artifact so that he could attack for lethal with Gadrak.
Amazing. Congrats to Joe for for accomplishing more nonsense in the Mardu space.
And one of my favorite victories for myself was when my opponent managed to transform Elbrus, and through the power of Kenra Spellspear and some friends, I was able to win on my next turn before I was certain to die to a 13/13 flying trampler.
I see. That's really good. I like that.
And that was a game where it was going to be a terrific story of victory for my opponent, and they did not perceive that things could turn for them on my turn. It was exactly the kind of escalating mayhem that I'm going for.
Have you found that your players respond well to that? Like the kind of the huge back and forth opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, every time I've drafted this with people, they're coming away with a smile on their face, whether they did something crazy or were subjected to something crazy. People always have a fun time.
That's encouraging to hear. You mentioned that folks bring up the Transformers cards or maybe some other universes beyond things as outliers. Talk a little bit about why those are in the cube.
I mean, I just like Starscream is one of the most interesting Monarch designs, and I couldn't put Starscream in there, by himself. But I just all of them are really interesting designs. I've gotten over the idea of other IPs on Magic cards. We could go back to the Walking Dead Secret Lair as a red line that they stepped over, but we might as well play with the fun game pieces that we have. And like I said, Starscream makes for some really interesting Monarch play patterns. The other ones are fun and interesting designs. And I like the Transformers, so I'm cool with that.
And they fit in this power level as well. And it sounds like they also hit your desire for storied cards. They do really interesting things.
Yeah. Anytime a card does something that we've never seen before, I am drawn to how could this work? What are the different ways to make this card, tell a story? I mean, so I'm an optimist. I'll look at like what is the most bananas magical Christmas land version of a game with this card, and I want to make those things possible. Sometimes you're going to get blown out, but other times you're going to have a story that you will dine out on for years.
Well, I think that opens yourself up to a lot more positive experiences than you could be shutting off by leaving them out.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, whether you are the creator or the victim of those stories, people still have a good time, and I love seeing that.
In reviewing some of your other projects on CubeCobra, you also have a bar version of this cube. What did it look like to convert something this dynamic into a portable package?
Sure. So the first thing I did was cut everything that created tokens. Everything that put counters on creatures or on other permanents. Just that's too much of hassle for a bar environment. But I didn't want to lose the monarchy. And fortunately, in a bar, you usually got something like a salt shaker or other totem that you could use to keep track of who's got the crown.
Something roughly crown shaped, right?
Something roughly crown shaped, yeah, or at least at least an object of desire that can be passed back and forth.
Good.
And then for the double-faced cards, I didn't want to lose the melds, since, like I said, that's some of the most fun things you can get up to. So I printed some some draft aids that print both sides of the card on one face, like a split card, and then the two different faces are flipped vertically, so you put the card down sideways, and one of the faces is oriented correctly and the other one's upside down. And so if you transform it, you can just rotate it 180 degrees and still keep track of which face you have.
That's a really sharp solution. It's a lot like how Arena presents some of those cards too that have multiple faces.
Yeah, there are some things that are just inevitably smoother in a digital environment for Magic, and so in terms of the ways that I've made put tokens together for this cube, and even the version that I'm bringing to CubeCon, when we're drafting that with people, I have those split card looking DFC proxies in the cube with then the real card in a transparent sleeve with the tokens. So when you're drafting, you don't have to take a card out of a sleeve to be able to tell what the other face is, even if you do have to, turn it sideways. And I don't have any split cards in the cube, so that no one is confused about what sort of split card looking thing they have in their hand.
That's wise. I mean, it sounds like the only downside to that is not getting to use like claim to fame or insult to injury or something like that.
Yeah, wear and tear I might have in here otherwise, but I might not. I mean, yeah, it's a compromise I was willing to make. But like I was saying, just getting it to be as smooth as possible, is a goal, because compared to when I started playing Magic in the '90s, there's just a lot more stuff to keep track of. And so I really like the Monarch mechanic, but I think that's about the limit of the outside the game objects. I wouldn't want to put the initiative or tempted by the ring in this cube, just because it is so much more cognitive load compared to what I already have is a lot of niche interactions and some obscure cards. People always have to do a lot of reading when they draft this cube.
Well, I think that's good. You get to introduce people to a lot of new things in a context that probably has a number of familiar things as well.
Yeah.
So not only have you done the Mardu Monarchy, you've explored a couple of other three color sets as well. Which other ones have you worked on so far?
So I've with a partner, a friend I made at the first CubeCon, we've designed an Obzon cube. So green, black, and white, and that's been a lot of fun. He suggested that we do that three color cube after he had played this one, and we actually have that in the main event at CubeCon this year as well. So that's been a lot of fun. It was challenging because it's not the color identity that I'm most gravitated towards in my history, but I've it's there's still a lot of fun synergies that don't fit into other three color sets. So that's been a lot of fun, and working together with a partner was also exciting new dimensions in design compared to doing it myself and being the last word on everything. And then this summer I started working on a Grixis cube. And while Melded Mardu Monarchy is high powered and scary, it still has some guardrails to keep the experience from going into total madness. The junk cube that Jeremy and I made is a little friendlier, but still a nasty place to let your guard down. But my Grixis cube was intentionally designed to avoid any illusion of safety. So all of the cards that you can cast with no mana up, all of the ways that you can punish your opponent. There are lots of ways to vote for a small game and fiery nihilism. And it's fun to bring out those different expressions of a subset of colors. What I said in my video for the junk cube is that environment allows these colors to flourish absent some of their natural predators. So
Right.
the if you're trying to do big splashy things in Mardu, and you have to worry about getting out ramped because you don't have green, or getting outdrawn, or having everything countered, taking those colors and strategies entirely out of the cube allows some of the fun things that I was going for to really shine in a way that they only really can, in my experience, in a cube like this.
And I was curious, and you've hit a couple of those notes already, about each of these shares at least two colors with the Melded Mardu Monarchy. How do you make those feel distinct with that much potential overlap?
Yeah, so the sort of design philosophies that I was talking about, lead you towards a lot of different cards. So grief and solitude are both in Melded Mardu Monarchy and in the Junk Cube, but they play out fairly differently because of the environment with the rest of the cards. So when it's over, I look at the intersection on CubeCobra, and okay, is this really as distinct as I think it is? And if there are only 20 or 30 cards in common, it's not going to be the same play patterns over and over again. But some cards are my favorite, and it's okay if those things show up in more than one place.
If you like chocolate, you can put chocolate on more than one thing.
That's true. You can have chocolate desserts, and you can have chocolate entrees.
I do have to say, Warren, when you were describing uh, that Mardu was such a dangerous color, I was expecting you to say that the other cubes are going to lean the opposite direction. So I was not ready to say, oh no, well, Grixis is actually much more dangerous.
Oh yeah, there's at no time are you safe in Tressorhorn Gardens.
Excellent. What have you appreciated about designing with somebody else as opposed to building on your own?
Well, it makes it much easier to make a distinct environment than, other things that, like you said, could have, two color overlap. It would have been easy to just, have all the same, black and white cards in those two cubes, and then, drop red and put in green cards that I thought were fun. I wouldn't have done that, but what we ended up with is much farther away from that than I think I could have done, at that point in my design experience without a partner. Plus, when you're designing a cube, you want to make something that's fun for a lot of different people. And, I can't necessarily see, no one person can see all the things that are fun for everyone. You can recognize, well, this is popular, but not fun for me. Everybody has their own experience, and it puts a whole different character on a cube when you're collaborating with someone, and forces you to think more carefully about some of your inclinations than you would otherwise, which has been great. We've been tweaking that design over the last year, and I might suggest something about a card that is fun, but not necessarily the most important to me. And Jeremy will say, "Well, I really want that in there, even if it goes last pick because it's sweet." And I'm excited to take it. And that's a little extreme, but that sort of thing goes both ways, where looking at it from a different perspective makes something better than either of us could have made alone.
That's a good word. So as you consider Melded, Mardu Monarchy, or the Tressorhorn Gardens, or any of the projects you've been working on, what have you found most surprising while working on those?
Well, I was surprised, when I started working on my Grixis cube, how easy it was to strongly differentiate it from, the other cube I made by myself with two of those same colors without a drastically, extensively, planned set of objectives. The first draft of it was still nothing like this cube in terms of how it felt to play. And I suppose that's not so surprising because there are so many different Magic cards. But when you want the resonant pieces that people are excited to see, that they're familiar with, mixed in with niche things that you might be one of only a few people for whom that's a favorite card. The game is so complex that perhaps I shouldn't have been surprised at how chaotically a few small or seemingly small constraints could change the result. So it's not something that I've gotten tired of yet.
So this is kind of a continuation of that thought. What advice would you then give to other designers who are working on their own environments?
Yeah, the piece of advice that I'm always excited to see someone give in a conversation about designing a cube is that there are no rules. You do exactly what you want to do, however you want the game to work, whichever cards you want. Anytime someone asks me a question, like, I have friends who want to design their own three color cubes, after seeing me have fun with three of my own. And well, what if I want to put this card in that has this hybrid identity that's not exactly fits within these three colors? Like, well, if you want to put that card in, you should. I'm not
Yeah,
making any rules about your cube, and neither is anyone else. It's your decision to have fun the way you want to. And like I said, that's I think the most important is that there are no rules. You do what you want.
there you go. Put it on a t-shirt.
There you go.
No rules. Well, Warren, as we trend toward wrapping up our conversation, uh, one of my favorite questions to ask is if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would it be and who would you have do the illustration?
Well, one of my favorite cards in this cube for story and personal affinity purposes is Kalia of the Vast. And if I could have a Kalia of the Vast illustrated by Elena Danner, that would make my decade.
Oh, that'd be really cool. I appreciate a lot of her landscape work.
So great. Oh man. Yeah. That was the first time I noticed her art was the standard showdown mountain that she did. I
Yes.
was like, what are all of these amazing little colored highlights in this art? This is so cool. And then I looked up other art of hers, and yeah, it's so good. But I got to have her sign a bunch of stuff at CubeCon last year, including a jeweled lotus that
Yes.
will be an important treasure for me forever, no matter what has befallen it this week. And my Grixis cube, I have a bunch of her Modern Horizons 3 islands. That's sort of the New Capenna Art Deco fountain cathedral. And I'm going to take those to Madison this year to get them signed.
Whether or not a card is legal in all formats, the
Yeah.
art can still be an amazing piece.
Yeah. I have her signed Nykthos of hers in this cube. And everyone's always excited to see that, even though you can't read the text as clearly anymore. That was a price I was willing to pay.
Absolutely. Well, Warren, this has been a delight, and I so appreciate you guiding us through these projects of yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It has been a sincere joy and pleasure for me.
If folks want to learn a little bit more about the Melded Mardu Monarchy, the Tressorhorn Gardens, the Junk Cube, or anything else you're working on, where would be the best place for us to point them?
So a short link to my CubeCobra is zoanon.net/cube. That's XOANON.net/cube. And that redirects to my CubeCobra.
Perfect. And I'll have that linked below in the show notes as well. Thank you again for your time, your expertise, and your passion for these projects. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to connect here in person at CubeCon in the fall and wherever opportunity arises.
Me too. Thank you again.